to the sound of sinister music. A car drives along roads surrounded by snow-covered mountains towards an isolated destination, the Overlook Hotel. Jack Torrance arrives and is greeted by Mr. Ullman for a job interview. Elsewhere, Danny and his mother, Wendy, are having breakfast. Danny asks if they're really going to live in that old hotel all winter. Wendy tries to cheer him up, suggesting it'll be fun, and asks if Tony, Danny's imaginary friend, has anything to say. Danny changes his voice, and speaking as Tony, says he doesn't want to go to the hotel. Back in Mr. Ullman's office, Jack accepts the position of taking care of the hotel during the winter. The manager assumes Jack is a teacher, but Jack clarifies that he's left teaching to become a writer. They explain that the hotel closes from October to May due to the high cost of keeping the road open with the 6 meters of snow that fall. Jack will be responsible for maintenance to prevent cold-related damage. Ullman warns him that the hotel's isolation may be difficult to cope with, but Jack sees the solitude as the perfect opportunity to make progress on his new book. Before concluding, Ullman mentions one last important detail. In 1970, Charles Grady, the winter caretaker, lost his mind. He killed his wife and 2 daughters with an axe, and then took his own life. Jack assures him that he will not have any similar problems. In the bathroom, Danny talks to his imaginary friend, Tony. He asks if his father will get the job at the hotel. Tony replies that Jack has already been hired and will soon call his mother. Indeed, Jack confirms over the phone that he got the job. Danny questions Tony about why he doesn't want to go to the hotel. Tony, evasive, refuses to talk about it, but Danny notices his fear. Later, Danny has a terrifying vision before fainting, an elevator in a hotel pouring out blood, and 2 twin girls at the end of a hallway. After recovering, a doctor examines Danny. She asks what he was doing before he fainted. Danny tells her he was talking to Tony, the boy who lives in his mouth. The doctor, concerned, asks if Tony has ever asked him to do things, but Danny avoids saying any more. In private, Wendy explains to the doctor that Danny started talking to Tony after he was injured and had to stay home during preschool. Regarding the injury, Wendy says Jack was drunk and upset when Danny messed up some papers. In a fit of anger, Jack grabbed him, causing Danny's shoulder to dislocate. Wendy defends Jack by saying that the incident led him to stop drinking, and he's been sober for 5 months, but the doctor expresses concern about the situation. The day to move into the Overlook Hotel finally arrives, and Jack, Wendy, and Danny head there. On the way, Wendy brings up the Donner Party, asking if they got stuck in those mountains. Danny asks who they were, and Jack tells him about the settlers who, trapped in the snow, had to resort to cannibalism to stay alive, recounting the story with a disturbing smile. Once at the hotel, Mr. Ullman welcomes them and shows them around the premises. Wendy is captivated by the elegance of the place. In the game room, Danny is throwing darts by himself. When he turns towards the door, he sees the unsettling twin girls from his vision, who silently walk away. Jack and Wendy settle into their room, and Mr. Ullman shows them the famous hedge maze. He mentions that the hotel was built on an old Native American burial ground, and that there were attacks from Native Americans during its construction in 1907. Ullman also shows them a snowcat, essential for transportation when the roads are blocked by snow. Finally, he takes them to the ballroom and informs them that all the alcohol has been removed for the winter. The hotel chef, Dick Halloran, appears and takes Wendy and Danny to the kitchen while Jack continues with Mr. Ullman. Halloran casually refers to Danny as Doc. Curious, Wendy asks how he knew that intimate nickname, but Halloran avoids the question. He then leads them to the pantry, where Danny, staring intently at Halloran, seems to read his mind. Internally, Halloran offers Danny some ice cream. When Wendy walks off with Jack so that Mr. Ullman can show them the basement, Danny stays behind, enjoying his ice cream with Halloran. Halloran explains to the boy that he knew his nickname, Doc, because they both have the Shining, a special ability his grandmother also had, which allows them to communicate telepathically. Danny says that Tony told him he shouldn't talk about it. He also tells him that Tony shows him pictures while he sleeps, and that when he wakes up, he can barely remember anything. Halloran asks if Tony has said anything about the Overlook. Danny, curious, asks Halloran if the hotel scares him. Halloran assures him he's not afraid, but admits the hotel has a special shine, just like some people. He explains that certain places hold echoes of things that happened before, and that only people with the Shining can perceive them, as well as see events from the past or future. He says many things have happened in the hotel, not all of them good. When Danny asks about room 237, the chef warns him to stay away from that room and to stop thinking about it. This film, full of ambiguities, is one of the most analyzed in history. No interpretation can fully explain everything. In this video, I will try to offer one that makes enough sense. First, let's consider the hotel as a representation of evil, which remains constant due to the corruption, perversion, and violence that have seeped into its walls from the beginning. This spiritual evil feeds and grows stronger. Its name, the Overlook, means to ignore or to overlook. The hotel brings to light the very things each character would rather not see: painful truths, fears, impulses, desires, and their darkest sides. The Torrance family is especially vulnerable to the hotel, as each one faces personal fears and truths they struggle to accept, but the hotel amplifies and makes impossible to ignore. Throughout the film, I will analyze the situation of each family member. 1 month later, the Torrance family has fully settled into life at the hotel. Wendy brings Jack breakfast as he wakes up. Jack confesses his fascination with the hotel, feeling as if he's been here before. Later, in one of the main halls, Jack, frustrated and bored, bounces a ball against the walls instead of writing. Meanwhile, Wendy joins Danny on an excursion inside the hotel's hedge maze, set to the sound of unsettling music. One Tuesday, in the kitchen, Wendy listens to a news report about a woman who went missing while hunting with her husband in Denver, along with a forecast of an approaching storm. Meanwhile, Danny rides his tricycle through the hotel and suddenly stops in front of room 237. He tries to open the door, but it's locked. Suddenly, the twin girls from his vision appear, terrifying him. He returns and flees on his tricycle. Downstairs, Jack types on his typewriter, withdrawn and distant. When Wendy asks how it's going, he responds with hostility and demands not to be interrupted while working. On Thursday, Wendy and Danny play in the snow while Jack watches them from inside with an intense and disturbing stare. By Saturday, the tension in the hotel has risen. The snowstorm worsens, and Jack continues writing. Wendy tries unsuccessfully to call outside, as the storm has knocked out communications. She uses an emergency radio to contact the sheriff, who advises her to keep the radio turned on. Meanwhile, Danny rides his trike through the hotel again and suddenly comes face to face with the twin girls. They greet him and ask, "Hello, Danny. Come and play with us." Upon hearing them, Danny sees images of the girls dismembered with a nearby axe. He covers his eyes, and when he looks again, the girls are gone. Danny admits to Tony that he's scared. Raising one finger, his voice transforms, and Tony speaks, reminding him of something Mr. Halloran said. Those horrible images are just like pictures in a book and can't really hurt him. On Monday, Danny goes to his bedroom to get his fire truck and sees his father sitting on the bed, staring at the wall. Jack calls him over, hugs him, and kisses his head, asking how he's doing. Danny says he's fine and asks if Jack likes the hotel. Jack says he loves it and wishes they could stay there forever. Then, Danny asks if Jack would ever hurt him or Wendy. Jack asks if Wendy has said something, but Danny says no. Jack concludes by assuring him he'd never do anything to hurt him. From the beginning, Danny feels a deep fear of his father due to the abuse he has suffered. In response to the psychological distress of being raised in an abusive environment, Danny creates Tony, his imaginary friend, as a form of protection. Although part of Danny recognizes his father's abusive nature, another part chooses to repress it out of fear and because he cannot face these truths alone. That is why the idea of being isolated in a hotel with his father terrifies him. Upon arriving at the hotel, a place that amplifies truths and allows no repression, Danny begins to see visions of the Grady twins, who were murdered by their father, representing Danny's own fear of being harmed by his father. Another day, while Danny is playing in a hallway, a ball, the same one Jack was throwing, mysteriously rolls toward him. Looking around and seeing no one, he walks down the hallway calling for his mother. When he reaches room 237, he finds the door open, enters, and the scene cuts. Elsewhere, Wendy hears screams and, alarmed, discovers they are coming from Jack, asleep at his desk. When she wakes him, he, disturbed, describes a nightmare in which he killed Wendy and Danny and expresses his fear of going insane. At that moment, Danny approaches. Wendy, shocked to see scratches on his neck, asks what happened, but Danny doesn't answer. Wendy turns to Jack, who responds with a disturbing look. Convinced that Jack is responsible for the bruises, Wendy grabs Danny and flees the room. Jack walks to the ballroom and to an apparently empty bar. Covering his eyes with his hands, he says he would sell his soul for a drink, and when he removes them, a bartender named Lloyd appears, and the bar is now fully stocked. Halloran revealed to us that the Shining, which includes telepathy and the ability to see past and future events, is a gift his grandmother also had, suggesting it may be hereditary. He mentioned that some places, like the Overlook, possess this power, and that some people might be unaware they have it. This implies that if Danny has the Shining, Jack might have it too, without realizing it. This is important because the hotel could be using that connection to influence Jack, which would explain his visions. "Hi, Lloyd," Jack greets with a smile and orders a bourbon. Lloyd quickly serves it. Jack says he's always liked Lloyd and raises a toast to the last 5 months without drinking. As he drinks, he speaks disdainfully about Wendy and complains that she keeps reminding him about the time he dislocated Danny's shoulder. He admits he hurt Danny, but tries to justify himself. Suddenly, Wendy bursts into the ballroom. Lloyd and the bottles are gone. Wendy, visibly upset and holding a baseball bat, shouts that Danny told her a woman tried to strangle him. Jack appears irritated, but Wendy insists. Jack fails to recognize how alcohol makes him more aggressive or the impact it has on his family, tending to minimize or excuse the abuse he inflicted on Danny. He also displays clear contempt towards his wife. For this reason, he becomes the perfect target for the hotel's malevolence, which now knows exactly how to manipulate him. Already leaning toward violence, Jack didn't need much of a push to lose control in the hotel's isolation. As the days passed, his irritability and aggression increased, intensifying his desire to drink to the point of saying he would sell his soul for a glass. At that moment, the hotel acted. Lloyd appeared and offered him a drink, a symbolic act akin to the poison apple that marks the beginning of his fall. Did Jack, in fact, pay with his soul? Up until that point, Jack had not been physically violent with his family. He assured Danny that he had loved him and would never hurt him, and he appeared disturbed after dreaming that he killed them, which shows that the thought of harming them still troubled him. However, this is the turning point. Jack knows that alcohol has led him to hurt his family in the past and has promised to give it up, so accepting that drink is a betrayal of his promise and a surrender to the dark side. Meanwhile, Mr. Halloran is lying down when his expression suddenly shifts to one of horror as he sees images of room 237 and a terrified Danny. Jack enters room 237 and finds a naked woman emerging from the bathtub. He allows himself to be seduced and kisses her, but when he looks in the mirror, Jack sees a decomposing woman. Images of Danny frightened in his bed are intercut. Horrified, Jack flees the room and locks the door. Continuing the thread around Danny, room 237 may symbolize the core of his fear, his father's abuse. Danny was lured into the room by a ball similar to the one Jack was using. Inside, he finds a woman who at first appears attractive, but then reveals her monstrous nature, reflecting Jack, who seems benign on the surface, but hides a dark side. When Jack investigates the room and allows himself to be seduced, despite knowing that this woman may have harmed his son, he reveals his monstrous side. Danny has a vision of the scene and realizes his father is not the loving figure he pretends to be. Mr. Halloran tries unsuccessfully to phone the hotel. Wendy asks Jack if he saw anything. He denies it and suggests that Danny must have hurt himself. Meanwhile, Danny sees the word Redrum written in red on a door. Wendy urges Jack to leave, but he becomes enraged and accuses her of ruining his chances. The change in Jack's behavior becomes evident after he drinks. From that moment on, he shows no concern for his family, becomes more aggressive, and lies to Wendy by saying he didn't find anything in the room. By doing so, he protects the hotel, trying to prevent his family from escaping. After all, he is the caretaker and must fulfill his pact. At this point, Jack has fully surrendered to the dark side. Halloran calls the sheriff, asking him to check on the Torrance family via the radio. Jack, in a frenzy, throws objects until music catches his attention. He follows the sound to the ballroom and discovers a roaring 1920s party in full swing. As he approaches the bar, Lloyd offers him a bourbon, telling him that, by orders from above, his tab is covered. Before drinking for the first time, Jack said he would sell his soul for a drink. Now, Lloyd informs him that his tab has already been paid by higher authorities. This could suggest that Jack is indeed paying for the drinks with his soul, a metaphor for the high cost of addiction. With each drink, his will weakens and his dark side gains control. Jack has sold his soul to the hotel for alcohol, and disinhibited by its effects, becomes increasingly susceptible to his impulses. Viewed in this light, the film could be interpreted as an allegory of alcoholism, both on the individual and on their loved ones. As Jack mingles with the guests, a waiter accidentally spills a drink on him and takes him to the bathroom to clean up. Jack discovers that the waiter's name is Delbert Grady, the same surname as the former caretaker who murdered his family with an axe. Although Grady denies having been a caretaker, he acknowledges having a wife and 2 daughters. Jack accuses Grady of killing his family and then taking his own life, but Grady says he doesn't recall such events. Jack insists, but Grady corrects him, telling him that Jack is the real caretaker and always has been, since Grady has always been here. Suddenly, Grady tells Jack that Danny has a special talent and is using it to call Halloran over to the hotel. Grady says that Danny is a naughty boy who needs to be corrected. just as he corrected his daughters for trying to burn down the hotel. He adds that Wendy also needs to be corrected, just as he did with his wife when she tried to interfere. At first, Delbert Grady seems not to understand what Jack is talking about, but then he shifts dramatically, saying he corrected his family and suggesting that Jack should do the same. This behavior shows a duality in Grady, as if another part of him suddenly takes over. When this side dominates, he claims to have always been at the hotel, implying that this aspect of Grady is a form of evil reincarnated over generations, which may have later inhabited Charles Grady, the caretaker who killed his family with an axe. Moreover, Grady claims that Jack has always been the caretaker, and Jack himself displays a similar duality, oscillating between being disturbed by the idea of harming his family and desiring to do so. This suggests that Jack, too, may carry a form of evil passed down through generations in the hotel, which the hotel then draws out and intensifies once they arrive. This could explain Jack's déjà vu sensations and his familiarity with Lloyd, the bartender. Meanwhile, Wendy is desperate to find a way out of the hotel. She hears noises coming from Danny's room, where he repeatedly says, "Redrum." When she asks what's going on, Danny, speaking in Tony's voice, replies that Danny is gone. Elsewhere, Jack disconnects the radio. The next day, Halloran flies to Denver and, upon landing, contacts a repair shop to request a snowcat that will allow him to reach the hotel, since all the roads are blocked. At the hotel, Wendy walks down the stairs looking for Jack in his study, but doesn't find him. She checks Jack's manuscript and discovers the same phrase repeated across hundreds of pages. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Suddenly, Jack appears and with a disturbing look approaches Wendy, questioning her presence in the study. He asks what they should do with Danny, and she suggests taking him to a doctor immediately. Jack complains that Wendy has never cared about his commitment to the hotel and insists that he won't leave until he fulfills his contract. He moves towards Wendy, who waves a baseball bat and yells at him to stay back. Jack claims he won't hurt her, he'll just bash her brains in. As Jack lunges, Wendy hits him, causing him to fall unconscious. She drags him into the pantry and locks him inside. Jack tries to convince her to let him out, but Wendy replies that she's taking Danny on the snowcat and will return with a doctor. Jack, laughing, tells her she's not going anywhere. He's destroyed the snowcat and the radio. Initially, Wendy did not acknowledge the reality of Jack's violent and abusive nature. This was evident in her conversation with the doctor, where she downplayed the incident in which Jack hurt Danny, calling it an accident and highlighting Jack's sobriety as a positive outcome. However, as the situation in the hotel worsens and Jack becomes more threatening, Wendy could no longer ignore the danger he posed to her and Danny. Instead of giving in, Wendy bravely confronted Jack and locked him in the pantry. Later, Jack, asleep in the pantry, hears a knock at the door. It's Delbert Grady. Displeased with Jack's lack of commitment, Jack promises to take care of his family and begs for another chance to prove himself. Grady agrees to release Jack only if he handles the situation with absolute firmness. Jack eagerly agrees, and the door opens. Meanwhile, Danny, or Tony, repeats Redrum, grabs his mother's kitchen knife, and writes Redrum on the door with lipstick. His screams wake Wendy, and when she sees Redrum reflected in the mirror, she realizes it says murder. At that moment, Jack strikes the door with an axe and manages to break it open, but Wendy pushes Danny out through the bathroom window and tells him to hide. Jack smashes through the bathroom door, shouting out his iconic line, "Here's Johnny!" He tries to open the door from inside, but Wendy slashes his hand with the knife. Suddenly, they hear a snowcat approaching. Jack goes downstairs, leaving Wendy in the bathroom, while Danny hides in the kitchen. Halloran arrives and enters the hotel. Jack ambushes him and kills him with the axe. Wendy runs in search of Danny and stumbles upon a disturbing scene in which two people, one dressed in an animal costume, are engaged in intimate acts. Jack chases Danny into the hedge maze, where Danny erases some of his footprints. Wendy discovers Mr. Halloran's body and then encounters a man in a tuxedo with a bloodied head who remarks, "Great party, isn't it?" Terrified, Wendy flees and finds a room filled with skeletons and cobwebs. She then sees the same blood emerging from the elevator that Danny had seen in his visions. Wendy has accepted that Jack is dangerous, and it seems no coincidence that once she acknowledges the truth, she also begins to see the hotel's violent and perverse nature. As her perception of reality sharpens and she accepts the true magnitude of her situation, she becomes more attuned to the hotel's hidden truths. It seems that, by recognizing and confronting her abuser, Wendy develops her own kind of shining. Meanwhile, Jack follows Danny's footprints through the maze until they disappear and Jack becomes lost. Danny runs out of the maze and finds his mother outside. Together, they board Mr. Halloran's snowcat and flee the hotel. Jack hears the snowcat driving away and begins to howl, stumbling through the cold. Hypothermia overtakes him, and he collapses among the hedges, dead and frozen by morning. Both Danny and Wendy gain strength by recognizing Jack's true nature, and rather than resigning themselves to it, they chose to face him. The final maze sequence is highly symbolic. It recalls the myth of the Minotaur, a creature that's half man, half bull, confined to a labyrinth and known for sacrificing humans. In the film, the Overlook Hotel traps Jack, who attempts to destroy his family. Danny, for his part, symbolizes Theseus, using his intelligence to escape both the maze and the cycle of abuse represented by his father. The chase ends with Jack's defeat, a fate akin to that of the Minotaur. Theseus's escape symbolizes the end of the human sacrifice cycle. In Danny's case, it represents the end of the cycle of abuse that his father had inflicted upon him. The final shot brings us to a hallway in the hotel, accompanied by elegant music. The camera zooms in on a photo of a party from 1921, revealing Jack Torrance among the crowd. The ending with the old photograph suggests that the evil Jack embodies is part of a repeating cycle across time. Or, in other words, that this pattern of violent behavior is perpetuated. Abuse or violence creates trauma whose consequences last long after the original event. A child raised around violent behavior is more likely to repeat it in the future, thus continuing this cycle of violence. However, the film also offers a spark of hope. When someone shines, that is, when someone becomes capable of recognizing the past and how it affects the present, and chooses not to follow that destructive path, but instead work towards a better future, then it is possible to break the pattern. That is precisely what Danny and Wendy demonstrate in this film. It's not enough to simply be aware of the darkness within us. Traumas, fears, repressions, uncomfortable truths, aggression. What truly matters is whether we allow those shadows to control us and fall into the same destructive patterns. Like Jack and Grady, perpetuating the cycle of violence and trauma. Or whether we choose to confront it and break it, just like Danny and Wendy. On the other hand, for those who prefer a more realistic interpretation of the story, here's one. What we saw could simply be a man going insane due to isolation, extreme stress, and alcohol withdrawal, with his wife and son also losing their sanity from being trapped with him. Cabin fever describes symptoms such as restlessness, irritability, loneliness, and anger that can arise from being confined in an isolated place for too long. In severe cases, it can make some people feel as if they're temporarily losing their minds. This syndrome likely affected all three members of the Torrance family. Jack is already mentally unstable from the beginning. In addition to being an alcoholic and abusive, it is possible he experienced a bout of temporary madness, which, combined with his sudden alcohol withdrawal, led to alcoholic hallucinosis, a condition that can include visual hallucinations and delusions. Let's remember that his hallucinations begin precisely when he craves a drink. Lloyd would represent his desire for alcohol, the woman in room 237, his repressed erotic desires, and Grady, his hostility towards his family. In Danny's case, his visions could be a response to the trauma of his father's abuse and the stress of being confined with him. The twins would represent his fear of suffering a similar fate. The woman in room 237 would symbolize Jack, a figure who appears benign on the surface but is terrifying underneath, whom Danny projects as a woman to cope with his fear in a way where the aggressor is not someone he loves. Halloran likely guessed his Doc nickname because Bugs Bunny was a very popular character among children at the time. Finally, Wendy, already anxious before arriving at the hotel, may have experienced psychological deterioration from being isolated with Jack, who becomes a real danger to her and Danny. The high stress and isolation could have triggered a similar psychological reaction in her. The final photograph could be Jack's father. Perhaps he was once the caretaker, and Jack accompanied him as a child. His father may have gone mad and possibly died there, and the cycle repeats. In short, the truth is that in this film, we can never be entirely sure what is happening, or how, or why. Every interpretation has its gaps. The decision is yours.